Welcome, everyone, to the Detroit Lions 2025 Draft Recap. I am the Doc, John Macaroon. Thank you for tuning in to the latest Detroit Lions Lone Wolves podcast. Christian Boer's here as well. He's taken his time to recap everything the Detroit Lions were able to accomplish. Very much an exciting 3 days, 7 picks, multiple trades. Brad Holmes, really, when you look at it, had a tough task. His task was to plug holes and also find talent to help this football team compete this year in a season in which you're going out on the road against high caliber playoff football teams. So the task was simply, Christian, to be able to go out there and add talent to fill needs and add talent that's going to be able to develop in the future. So just your first thoughts on the Detroit Lions draft, because we're going to go through each pick and a couple of the big topics. But early on, I thought, and the way I've described it is it was a professional draft. I thought that the team was able to go out there and add talent at a couple spots that you needed. And I felt like the talent that was drafted, you could clearly see based on their athleticism and based on what they're able to do on the football field, there's opportunities for some impact from this draft.
Yeah, and I think that it's very difficult for the Lions to do what they did because picking 28th, a lot of that high-end, top-tier, immediate starter type talent is going to be off the board in the first round. But I think they were able to get a good player in Tyleik Williams that's going to be able to help them. And as far as specifics, we'll get into how each player can help. But I think the basis for me is the fact that you got 4 or 5 guys at the very least who should be able to help you relatively quickly, whether it's rotationally, whether it's carving out a starting role, or whether it's at least providing good depth in insurance for the starters ahead of them. Let's face it, the Lions roster is not one that needs a bunch of starter level talent. There are certain areas where, we'll talk about edge rusher, but a lot of the places on this roster have incumbent starters. Like I was going through and doing my offensive depth chart, and I'm like, basically every starter they have is coming back, with the exception of right guard. They've got just about everybody back. And so for that reason, they don't have a ton of pressing, gotta have it needs. But I think you got 4 or 5 guys at the very least who can help you very, very soon. And when you're picking so late in every round, that's a hard thing to do. So I think while this isn't your show-stopping, everybody's an immediate contributor type of draft class, I think the Lions got a lot of quality pieces out of this. And it's going to be exciting to watch them develop.
Agree. And I think that there's room for debate regarding each pick, regarding who was taken, who was not taken. So look, Brad Holmes was willing to make some deals and was willing to be aggressive at certain spots in the second and third round and waited until the 6th round to target the biggest position. But let's start with the very first selection. And I'm curious because I do think there's one player that was selected after that's going to make some people, that was kind of the talk after the first selection. So it was real interesting when the Lions were on the clock. Kind of had a feel maybe they would have been aggressive for maybe an edge rusher, but you don't know. The general manager indicated it takes 2 teams to tango, and you don't know if the Lions were willing to move up at all or tried to take an edge rusher. But in the end, they draft defensive tackle Tyleik Williams. And I think the pick is very much a solid pick, knowing that you're going to need reinforcements behind Alim McNeill. I think that he's got elite athleticism, movement, can start at the very basic level, Christian. He can stop the run with room to grow and develop as a pass rusher. What was your reaction to the Tyleik Williams selection at pick number 28? They stay at their spot in the first round.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned it right away. The run stopping ability is what's going to help him get on the field right away. And I think that when you look at kind of projecting where he fits, I think there's 2 avenues the Lions can go. Number one is you can put him in a rotation at nose tackle with Brodric Martin and Roy Lopez, and he's playing maybe 1 down at a time, whether it's first down, second down, those kind of base run-heavy downs as the nose tackle. Or with Alim McNeill expected to miss a portion of the start of the regular season, maybe you pair him up and play him with a DJ Reader or Roy Lopez in these run first downs, and you would give yourself a lot of size on that defensive interior. And if you're talking about a guy like DJ Reader who's consistently drawing double teams from centers and guards, now you're freeing up guys like Tyleik Williams to work one-on-one, and I think you can see maybe the best version of him in that area. And so I think it's exciting when you talk about his ability to get off the line of scrimmage, his athleticism. His defensive line coach at Ohio State compared his movement ability to Aaron Donald, who is the future Hall of Famer. Like, it's hard not to get excited about that. He is not the most flashy pick. Like, he is not the headline attraction, but I think he has the ability to really help the Lions, specifically in the run game early on. And oh, by the way, there's a whole nother level to this guy that we can unlock as a pass rusher. And so I do think it's very exciting when you dig into how he can help the Lions. And again, he is a guy who maybe isn't an every down player right away, but I do think there's potential for him, whether it's he slims down and kind of goes on the Aleem McNeil plan, or he just becomes your everyday or every down nose tackle, because DJ Reader's on the last year of his contract. So there's a lot of upside and a lot of different ways the Lions can use this pick.
Well, a byproduct of what we're going to talk about is some impact. Check out Lions on SI as we talk about bubble players, who this draft maybe helped, who maybe is now potentially in jeopardy based on some of the moves. It just lends really, Christian, to the idea that when you have Roy Lopez added in free agency, you draft an interior defensive lineman. I think the byproduct, that the first thing that people thought of was like, man, Brodric Martin's climb to get some playing time is going to be even harder. Maybe I think in my early 53-man roster projection, I have Brodric Martin on the outside looking in. And I think it's just real challenging because the Lions are just telling everybody, look, we need more along the interior. And it's suffice it to say, similar to Ennis Rakestraw, the Lions can't really count on Brodric Martin when he was injured last year. And so when you have a talent like Tyleik Williams, it probably lends to the idea that Brodric Martin's got a lot of work to do. It doesn't mean that the chapter's closed with the Lions, but it's starting to look like, and it's unfortunate that Brodric's time in Detroit could be coming to a close if he does not have a good training camp. What did you make now of his situation because of the addition of a talented first-round draft pick?
Yeah, I mean, it's been tough for him to kind of get a foothold in terms of the defensive line rotation. Obviously, his rookie season was one that we all kind of knew was going to be a developmental year. He was going to spend a lot of time as a healthy scratch on game days, but he did get a couple opportunities. And then this past year, really, I thought he had a pretty decent preseason and training camp, and it kind of looked like there would be some snaps available, especially with DJ Reader expected to miss the regular season opener last year. But then in the preseason finale, he suffered an injury that put him on an injured reserve until, I believe, week 8 or 9. And then at that point, it was all just about reacclimating, and he never really could make a substantial impact. And so now heading into year 3, he doesn't have the body of work to necessarily say, okay, he's safe on the final roster. But the Lions are going to let him compete it out. And if he earns his spot, then he'll do just that. He'll earn his spot. But I do think because he does not have the proven body of work through 2 years, he's going to have a good training camp to make the team. Like, there is no more, oh, he's developmental, so we'll keep him along for the ride. Heading into year 3, it's time to prove it. And so I think that he's one of the players that you need to keep an eye on throughout the offseason program and training camp, because I think there's a lot at stake.
No doubt. And that's what the Lions really in the National Football League, NFL, not for long.
Yeah.
So you have to earn your keep, and certain spots, like we're going to talk about, probably lend to certain players that know that they're going to potentially have to battle when the Detroit Lions recognize what their needs were. Clearly, one of the needs was along the offensive line, and they were able to, in the second round, make a move, be aggressive, and were able to target Tate Ratledge in the draft. I thought a great pick. When you look at the tape, my goodness, versatile. I think he can be a great in both run and pass protection. You see an individual that was dealing with a little bit of injury last year, so you didn't get the full complement of what he was able to do. But my goodness, when you see his tape throughout his entire collegiate career, my goodness, Christian, you would project that you now have great competition at the guard spot. Graham Glasgow is going to be in a battle for his job because Tate Ratledge is big, athletic, and I think is a prototypical offensive lineman you want to protect Jared Goff and to open up some holes for Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery.
Yeah, he has elite size and pretty good athleticism for the position. You don't see very many guards that are 6'6.5", maybe 6'7", depending on the day. And I think that some of his production, some of the issues he may have had in terms of agility or getting up the field can be tied back to an ankle surgery that he had this past year that he played through. And I think once he got healthy in the spring and was able to showcase just how athletic he is when fully healthy, I think this is a great pick for the Lions. He fits all their athleticism needs. He's tough, he's physical, and he is not afraid to do the dirty work. And oh, by the way, he has a bunch of starts in his collegiate career at right guard, which is where Kevin Zeitler played before he left. So this is a guy that can just be a natural plug-and-play piece. It's not going to be easy for him because he's got other young bodies. The Lions have drafted 4 offensive linemen in just the last 2 drafts. Everybody's going to be competing for a spot, but it's hard not to like Tate Ratledge, how he'll fit with the Lions from an organizational standpoint and just his personality, but also by his on-field performance. There's a lot to like about this pick. This might be one of their better ones, if not the best pick they made over the weekend. I really like this fit.
Yeah, agree. I like the idea of I had the Lions in my final mock draft targeting offensive line early. And so when you see a player of his caliber and you see an individual that you want to go up and target, I like the idea of, hey, building in the trenches and finding a talent, because you saw the offensive line was an area of need. You saw that Graham Glasgow, while he's an aging veteran and is somebody that you can count on maybe to be a backup in a reserve role, I do think that Tate can come in with Christian Mahogany and then a later draft pick. I think you're starting to see the future offensive line start to take shape. And then there's an undrafted free agent they got in Mason Miller, who's also can play tackle and also add depth with Manu down the road. So I'm pretty impressed with the way in which the Lions pretty much seemingly could have, in this draft, I think, restocked the offensive line. Now, the pick that everyone's going to talk about, and one in which we are going to have a debate, because I like the player. I'm not going to use the word reach. They didn't reach. He's a good player. Everybody knew the Lions loved Isaac TeSlaa. Not Tesla. TeSlaa is the way in which you want to say it. Try and say that a couple times quickly. But I'll say this. You're not going to find too many 6'4", big-bodied receivers that can play slot, play outside, speed, great hands, and I think clearly is a fit because of his love and loyalty to the Lions. Showed up to the Lions interview with a Lions jersey on, and Brett Holmes was like, come on, man. You don't got to do that. You don't got to butter me up. But he was like, no, I'm a Lions fan. I'm a local guy. And he proved that, wow, yeah, he is a Detroit Lion. So you got a Lion. So he's going to work hard. He's going to try, and I do think he'll be one of the players that meets his potential. But it would be negligent of us to just disregard that they traded 3 third-rounders for him. Excuse me. Is there a player, Christian, worth that? I mean, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but what was your initial reaction to the selection?
Well, I think that my initial reaction was, well, that's a lot. But I think that when I've in the days since the draft, it started to kind of come together. And I want to get your opinion on this as well. But Brad Holmes talked about it on 97.1 The Ticket. He said they made 30 attempts to trade up in the draft. And you have to think that they wanted this player so bad that they were trying to make moves up. And then they finally decided, you know what? That if this is what it's going to take, we're going to have to pay this price. And so they elected to move up 30 spots. And we don't know what goes on in NFL war rooms. And who knows, maybe at pick 71, if they didn't trade up, somebody would have took him. But I get the sense that maybe the Lions, and settled isn't the right word, but you kind of just accept the fact that this is what it's going to take to make a move to get the player that you want. And they really wanted him. So while all the trade charts and all that, and even myself a little bit, think that maybe they overpaid just a touch. If you really feel that conviction about this player and you think that he can fit and you really like him and there's a conviction behind it, then it's hard to fault them for making that move. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but maybe in a year from now, if he only has 4 catches as a rookie, maybe we look back and say, you know what, yeah, they overpaid for that. But at the same time, there's avenues to where he can help the Lions offense right away with his frame and with his speed and his run blocking ability, which I wasn't aware of until I just recently flipped on some of the film and watched him block a little bit. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, yeah, now I see why the Lions coveted him so much. So did they overpay a little bit in the trade? Yes. But I think some of it is just due to the fact that that's what it was going to take to get the deal done. And the Lions wanted to get the deal done, so they made the move.
Okay, what do you think his early role will be in 2025? I think, yeah, clearly the replacement for Tim Patrick down the road, but I think he can do a couple different things down the road. Clearly maybe special teams value early on as well, but somebody that can acclimate, develop in the shadows early in the year while the offense gets going. But, I think that steadily, I do think that he'll find his avenue on this roster to be able to compete down the road, maybe even for a playoff push.
Oh yeah, I think that in the long term, I get the sense they want to use him as an X because Brad Holmes talked about it after the draft when they picked him, talking about how they do believe he has the capability to be an X receiver. He was more of a slot at Arkansas, and so I think in the immediate future you're going to see him in packages where maybe Amon-Ra St. Brown is on the outside, and then you've got Jamison Williams and Isaac TeSlaa kind of lined up together. And I know Amon-Ra St. Brown, but we've had this discussion. He does not have the prototypical X receiver size, but he's so crafty, you can line him up anywhere. And for that reason, the Lions should be able to utilize Isaac TeSlaa a little bit out of the slot and kind of let him play where he's comfortable right away. And then if an injury happens or something of that nature, or maybe Tim Patrick, doesn't kind of recapture that magic that he had a year ago, now all of a sudden that conversation started where maybe you are lining him out on the outside. But I think that's more of a down the road thing. I think his immediate role is in the slot in certain packages where you can just get him the ball in space and let him run. And I'm excited to see how that plays out.
So now you mentioned on the surface that if the Lions find players that they like, they're willing to trade up for. But multiple third-round picks, basically, the media room looked at it like, well, basically the Lions traded Aaron Glenn for Isaac TeSlaa because you gave up your compensatory picks. But, the Lions could be in line with how the formula works to earn some compensatory picks based on their signings and who departed and all that. So the formula could work itself out. And we'll always talk about those picks later on in the coming weeks. But when you look at it, the Lions have clearly, and we can talk about it in the framework of the TeSlaa pick, but the Lions made multiple trades in this draft. They target the players that they see fit, and the Lions were willing to move up 32 spots to get them. And so it opened up the debate, was it a reach? Do you think that, maybe the Lions overvalue guys that they like and are willing to make trades? Because in the context of the Brodric Martin deal, it's kind of similar. Willing to trade multiple assets and be aggressive for their talent. Did the same thing with Ratledge. I think the Lions ended up with 3 or 4 trades in this draft to maneuver. And so the idea is there that if the Lions find and scout players that they want, they're willing to be aggressive. But in the context of picks, 3 picks for a draft prospect to move up 32 spots. And I know that the Jaguars were going to ask a lot to move down that much, but do you think that maybe you could have said, all right, if you're going to be aggressive and you have an area of need at the defensive end spot, do you think that potentially the Lions could have used that spot if you want to trade up for an edge rusher? Or you say, you know what, double down and just indicate that, hey, if they think TeSlaa is the guy, that's the position. I think that an offensive skill position is interesting in this offense, but maybe not the most needed at this time.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I don't think that wide receiver is the most pressing need they have on the roster this year. But and this is something I wanted to float out to you earlier. Something that intrigues me is the Lions made these 2 trade ups, and then they made a smaller one for Miles Frazier on the 5th round. But something that I thought about is maybe just Brad Holmes just didn't feel like this was a necessarily great draft class. And he thought that maybe by sitting back at 102, they just weren't going to get a player that they were super excited about. And the theme with all of these guys that they pick are that they're stoked about all of them and they feel a ton of conviction. And they were the number 1 player on their respective draft boards every time they come up somehow. But to me, they made this move. And yeah, did they overpay a little bit? Yes. Like if you look at the charts, the overall value of the capital, yeah, I do think that was a little bit of an overpay. But I think from his perspective, what this looks like to me is that he just didn't feel great about the options that were going to be there at 102. And rather than wait around until it got to pick 80 or pick 90 to make a move up, he wanted to go get his guy right now. And so he jumped on a trade offer and, he overpaid a little bit, but at the end of the day, they got the guy they like. And I think that in the immediate judgment of it, we view it as an overpay. But if TeSlaa comes to Detroit and works out, we're going to be like, props to him. Why didn't they take him in the 2nd round? So, in the instant reaction, my instant reaction is that that is a little bit of an overpay, but it's also like I see the vision and I kind of get the sense that the Lions just didn't feel great about what they could have gotten at pick 102.
All right. Now they go to the LSU program for the first time in several years. Great opportunity for the Lions. Look, they targeted players from the SEC, Blue Bloods, Ohio State, and now LSU for Miles Frazier. What do you think? I think many people believe that he's going to be potentially competing for a rotational spot, but maybe early on might not be a starter, but a great fit for the Detroit Lions. I think great value. I think a good player that you see can be a complement on this offensive line and to add depth and a good rotational spot. What did you make of the pick of Miles Frazier?
Yeah, I think Miles Frazier was one of the. Yeah, I when I texted you about it after the selection, I said it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Christian Mahogany situation, where he's just a guy who was viewed by a lot of different evaluators as kind of a top 100 prospect, expected to be day 2, maybe the 4th round type of pick, and for whatever reason, he just slid down the board. I think some of that is just the overall offensive interior maybe being devalued a little bit. A lot of people like to take tackles and move them to guard. So sometimes the guards kind of wear the brunt of that. But I do think, and I wanted to go over some of these numbers with Miles Frazier, started his career at Florida International. He was a freshman All-American, and he was the starting left tackle at Florida International. He transferred to LSU. The following year, he starts 13 games, 10 of them at left guard, 2 of them at right guard, and 1 of them at right tackle. And that theme kind of continues throughout the rest of his collegiate career. So this is a versatile player who has the ability to provide a depth option at multiple spots, just about everywhere but center is where he started games in college. And while it'll be an adjustment, adjusting to the Lions, offensive line and what they ask of all their guys. So it's not like he's just going to be able to come in and be fluent in all 5 positions right away. He does give the Lions options. And, he's another guy that's not going to go down without a fight in terms of the starting position at guard. And, I think that there's some heat on Graham Glasgow now because you've added 2 guards in this year's draft, and then you added a guard in Mahogany, and potentially Dan Campbell talked about maybe moving Manu over to guard too from last year's draft class. So all of a sudden you got 4 new faces, and also that puts a crunch on the roster because let's face it, the Lions are going to carry 10 offensive linemen max, and your starters are going to take 5 of those spots. So if Grant Glasgow stays in the starting lineup, you got one of the 3 options there going in at right guard, and then your other 2 guys, whether it's 2 from this year, 2 from last year, are going to take those depth spots. So all of a sudden, this roster starts to feel really small, especially when you take into account that Dan Skipper is probably going to be the swing tackle. So this, to me, sets up a fascinating competition for the offensive line heading into training camp.
Agree, and that's what you want. And so similarly, I do think that Coyote Awosika, Kobe Sorsdahl, Dan Skipper, they're going to have to really showcase, and Michael Neese showcase what they're about, and that's what you want in competition, especially with the undrafted free agents that were brought in. So it's going to be intriguing along the offensive line. And then something that Brad Holmes said was they're going to cross-train a lot of these draft picks so that you can see potentially Frazier and Ratledge on both sides, both guard positions. And I'm curious to see how it's going to shake out. And rookie minicamp in a couple weeks will showcase a little bit about what the Lions think early on. Now, the position that everybody was talking about, Brad Holmes said, man, on day 2, people were like, you didn't pick an edge yet. And so I'd asked him, I said, is there a chance the Lions don't take one? Now, if you followed my the mock drafts, I had a feeling the Lions weren't prioritizing it based on the work we did at the combine, learning from the league. You kind of got a sense that, okay, they think that this is a class that had depth along the defensive line. And I do think that they paid attention to costs as well. So they have Marcus Davenport. Clearly, they have an affinity for him and the veteran, and they're hoping they're lucky and he's productive. But they waited till the 6th round, and they get an individual that really epitomizes what the Detroit Lions are about. Ahmed Hassanein is just a true prospect that you could really root for as a fan, somebody that said he was willing to do everything possible, including lay down and die for Dan Campbell, which really, I just think that he knew. He was like, man, I'm projected to be like down at the bottom in the 7th round. And so he was overcome with emotion because the Lions believed in him. And he showcased that. He's the first Egyptian to ever be drafted in the NFL. So that's great. Grew up, born in the United States, but then moved to Egypt and now comes back and just in recent years started to speak English and play football, I think since 2019. So this is a young guy that is going to still need to be developed, but he's got the motor, he's got the passion, he's got the intangibles. So I don't want to hearken it to James Houston. But in regards to the development aspect, I think that you're not going to get a lot of productivity early in the year out of, this prospect out of Boise State. But I think maybe if something happens, if there's an injury, I do think the Lions would count on Al-Quadin Muhammad and Derek Barnes and others at spots to produce that edge rushing, situation with Levi and Josh Pascal and Mekhi Wingo. But I do think with development, this has the potential to be a prospect that everybody likes. But I just think that we got to pump the brakes because many people, I think, are viewing him as the answer. And we'll talk about that overall depth. But good pick, gets everybody off of Brad Holmes' back. But I do think that we got to pump the brakes on what we think we can. Well, I think that my opinion is we got to pump the brakes in regards to what he can do early in his NFL career.
Yeah, I mean, he was incredibly productive at Boise State over the last 2 years, just the last 2 years for the Broncos. He had 22 sacks and 33 tackles for loss. So at the group of 5 level, very, very good. Obviously, it's going to be a jump. And like you mentioned, he just relatively recently, started playing organized football. So there's going to be some bumps along the road. But I'm telling you, and I mentioned this to you earlier when we were talking about it, if Ahmed Hassanein does not work out for the Lions, it's not going to be for a lack of effort. This dude is going to play with his hair on fire. He's going to play super hard and super physical right from the jump. There's going to be some technical aspects of his game that he's going to need to improve upon. There's no doubt about that. But in terms of effort level and that grit that we talk about with a lot of these players that end up working out under Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, he's got all that. He checks all those boxes. I'm with you. I think the expectations for him need to be moderate, lower. Like, let's be realistic here. He's not going to come in and set the world on fire. But I'm telling you, he's going to play right away really, really hard. And for that reason, he's going to be in the mix. I would not be surprised if he has a strong training camp and a strong preseason. And then from there, it's all about what does he earn? What does he earn in terms of snaps, reps? Is he a guy that you take to the game? Is he a guy that's, an inactive on game day? I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of his role early on, but I wouldn't be shocked if this is a guy who you're calling his name a lot towards the end of the year and heading into year 2, he's a guy we're all really, really excited about.
So Brad Holmes had to answer for the defensive end spot. And I really do like the fact that there's a debate happening. And again, that's how I prefaced it when I opened the subject with him at the Combine. I'm thinking that, Brad Holmes, I said to him, based on how well you built this roster, there's not really a lot of needs. The need clearly is defensive end. And many people think you are one player away, one position solidified away from being a team that not only gets to the postseason, but can advance further. I just think Brad Holmes looks at it differently, and it's a disagreement. He believes that, we got veterans, we got Davenport on an affordable deal. We still can make moves. So why is this a position that's emphasized so much? Well, I think, one, the Eagles showed you that 2, 3, 4 players rushing to the quarterback and playing at a high level, that Eagles defensive line was stacked from one end to the other. So people are like, okay, we're not asking for all 5 spots. We're asking for along your front, your 4-3, that opposite of Aiden could be a little bit more productive. And Brad Holmes still is like, we have one of the elite ones. So what's everybody clamoring for another one for? And I just look at it like more. That's my philosophy, more at every spot, but specifically at a spot where if you impact the quarterback and you have young defensive ends, well, one, I think he's not paying attention to what his own guys are saying. Recall on a great podcast, Amon-Ra St. Brown said, "Oh, if we get Myles Garrett or Mason or one of the best, Max Crosby or Trey Hendrickson, hey, if you get a great defensive end, you don't need corners." Wasn't that said publicly through the airwaves? So we listen. I listen. So it kind of lends to the idea that I think to calibrate it, I think Brad needs to emphasize it a little bit more and the fans need to emphasize it just a little bit less. And then we meet in the middle. But I think the Lions need more along the front there. And it should always be that way. Unless you have 2 all-pros, I think the attitude is get the most talent possible, whether it be Zadarius Smith or whoever. But I think you need more talent along the defensive front. Are you confused that Brad Holmes is just still scratching his head going, why are you guys pestering me? I'm trying to do the best I can within the parameters of giving everybody money and getting it. But I wonder if he's just trying to save face because he knows that you can't throw the talent that you do have under the bus. But I think there's a way that he could address it better by saying, hey, we're always looking for the best of the best. We're not done. He did say that, but I think that he should say, I understand why it's such a premium position. He should acknowledge that the Eagles had a great defensive line, but he should also, I think, hype up his own guys. He should say, look, he should acknowledge that I know that there's injury histories with our guys, but if we're lucky, Davenport's going to get us a lot of sacks. Al-Quadin Muhammad's going to grow in this defense. Our new guy is going to be great. So to take the I don't understand stance is a little bit weird.
Yeah, it's all kind of interesting to piece together. And I think that a big part of this argument is they are banking on, when he says that they feel good about it, he is banking on Marcus Davenport and Al-Quadin Muhammad and Josh Paschal to almost have like career years. And Davenport's been good when healthy, but he hasn't played a full season to this point in his career. And Muhammad's kind of bounced around a little bit. I would say that Muhammad was one of, if not the best offseason or midseason addition they made last year due to all the injuries. But I do think that when everybody's healthy, like they do have a decent group here. But like we're not living in Candyland. Like injuries happen, and they had a bunch of them last year. Do I think they'll have a similar amount? Probably not, but there's going to be guys that get bumps and bruises and have to miss games. And because of that, I agree with you. I do think the Lions need just a little bit more. I am not saying they need to go out and trade for Trey Henderson. Remember, I wanted them to trade for Myles Garrett. But when I take a step back and kind of think about it, they're going to put themselves in a very tough position from a salary cap perspective if they go get one of these guys. Now, can we find a middle ground? Like a guy like a Malcolm Kuntz, who is a free agent, who wouldn't have broken the bank, but would have given you a really, really solid option opposite Aiden Hutchinson. Like that, to me, is the type of move they should be trying to make. And is that Zadarius Smith? Maybe. I don't know. But you got to find another guy who can come in and help you out. And also kind of mentor the young Ahmed Hassanein. Like, I do think that they could benefit from getting just one more piece. And at the very least, that would elevate the competition level in training camp. And I think that would be beneficial for everybody. So I agree with you. I do think they need a little bit more.
That should always be the attitude of the fans. So I think it was great that, the media asked him repeatedly, hey, 6 rounds a gamble. Like you could have taken a chance, and we'll address it further in further podcast. Maybe the next one we record later this week, looking at players they could have taken in the first round, or reshaping this draft maybe differently had they taken a different swing. But continuing our look, Dan Jackson, safety in the 7th round. I think a great depth piece, great in special teams. I think his early contributions will be on special teams, and sneaky fast for an individual that walked on at Georgia.
Yeah, Dan Jackson, very smart player, only has about 1 full year of starting experience defensively, but was pretty productive last year at Georgia. Former walk-on, worked his way into his position. He's a hard worker, and there's some talent to be unlocked there as well. I think he's only going to grow, and he'll help the special teams units out right away.
No doubt. And then the final pick, a player that I think has a nice potential to maybe be that Antoine Green that the Lions were trying to accomplish with him. But Dominic Lovett in the 7th round. What do you like about his game? What do you see from him, and what's your reaction? What do you think his potential is to maybe even make the team this year?
Yeah, I think there's some explosive ability there. I think that the one thing that I didn't necessarily love about Dominic Lovett is some of his issues with drops. And because of that, I'm really intrigued to see whether he can put a solid training camp together with little to no issues on that front. Special teams potential. I don't think he did a ton of return game stuff at Georgia, but maybe that's something you try him out at. Not going to take over for Khalif Raymond by any means, but maybe you throw him back there on kick return with Craig Reynolds or whoever that running back option is and see what he can do. So, I'm not as high on this pick with Lovett, but I do see big play potential. Very small, and he's kind of stuck in that slot only type of role. So we'll see how the Lions use him. This is somebody who I have a little bit lower expectations on, but intrigued by the fit, and we'll see what happens.
All right, with our last few minutes here, the biggest question mark is going to be, look, I think this draft for the future helps this team move forward, starting to rebuild another core. I like what they're doing in the trenches. I like the opportunity that you have along the offensive line to kind of set that position. You have great young defensive backs. You have the nice mix of vets with Amik Robertson and DJ Reed. You have the replacement for DJ Reader. I think that you're in good shape to replace Ali McNeil in the short term. So your safety spot's pretty much locked down this year. But I look at it and I say, okay, this is a draft that's going to help the future. And my first thought was that I released on our YouTube channel. Check it out. The new On SI Lions YouTube page, which is blowing up with videos, and another aspect besides the website to check out our videos, post daily, which is great. Thank you for all the new subscribers. Check it out as we continue to grow in our digital landscape, in the new digital landscape. I look at it and I said, I like the draft for the future. I don't think it did a lot to help this team compete with the Commanders, Rams, Eagles in regards to immediate impact. TeSlaa is probably going to be lower on the depth chart. Ahmed Hassanein lower on the depth chart. I think you're going to get the immediate impact probably from Tyleik Williams and Tate Ratledge. But beyond that, you look at it and there's going to be some development needed further down the road. So you hope that TeSlaa maybe as a rookie can showcase, but are you going to get the Puka Nacua impact? That'd be great. But I see 2026, 2027, when you're looking at cap nightmare situations, that you got some young guys that are affordable. But for 2025, I'm a little bit concerned that the draft didn't do enough in terms of immediate impact. But the Lions still have a lot of good players that are starters that are going to come back healthy. That would make my point mute. I get that. But I look at it like, everyone's saying the draft had some spots that had some talent. But Brad Holmes looked at it maybe a little bit differently in regards to the overall talent, and that's why they went this road. But what are your thoughts in terms of now how this draft impacts 2025?
Yeah, I think that you're spot on in one aspect, and that's that they didn't get a bunch of guys that are going to be the reason they jump over the top. But I do think they got some good complementary pieces here, and I think that's why I think your word choice of remain is a good word choice, because this draft did not make them Super Bowl contenders. But I don't think they got worse. I think that at the very least, this is a team that will be in the mix. I do not think that the players they drafted will necessarily be the reason that they are in the mix. They've got a lot of star power coming back. I don't think it's going to be Tyleik Williams. We're not going to be looking back and say, oh, it's Tyleik Williams. He's the reason the Lions are in the NFC Championship game. Now, do I think he's capable of being a guy who can make a stop on 4th and 1 in a gotta-have-it situation in a game that can win you the division? Yeah. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I think Tate Ratledge can be a starter at guard right away. And so for that reason, I would say I would answer this question, yes. I do think the Lions are remaining Super Bowl contenders as the result of this draft. Did they get instant, immediate impact guys who are going to be in contention for Rookie of the Years and All Pros? Probably not. But they do have a solid base here of guys that they can develop and grow. And that's really about what you can expect from a team that's picking 28th in the draft instead of 7th and 2nd in the draft like they were a couple of years ago. So I think they made the most of what they had. And I think these are some players that aren't going to win Rookie of the Year, but in 2 to 3 years, we can say, you know what, these guys are solid NFL players.
Yep, exactly. Hope for the future, little concern about the present, but we start the evaluation pretty quickly. In May, now you know that May 9th will be rookie minicamp. Stay tuned to Lions on SI as over the next couple of weeks we preview what these players are going to bring to the table. Christian will do great film review. We know we have contacts with those that have coached or been around these athletes, so we're going to bring you comprehensive coverage, the good, the bad, the hits, the misses, the impact of these talents on the roster. And remember, if you agree or disagree, let us know. No apologies made here for our opinions. These are based on what we see with the information that we do have. And interestingly, though, which was funny at the time, Brad Holmes said, hey, on the radio, he said, it's kind of like being at the book club and not reading the book. Well, technically, if you guys have been following this great, fine podcast with these two great hosts, there is a host that has a lot of books that he read. Now, are they football books? Are they appropriate reading material? It's for me to know and for you to guess. But I'll say this book collection, along with my records collection, very diverse. It goes from entertainment to life stories to football. So technically there is a guy who read the books and you're looking at him. And so thank you guys for your support of the Lone Wolves podcast. Thank you for listening to my first thoughts as we let Christian rest a little bit, enjoy the weekend. And now he gave his insightful comments. We're going to be bringing it more podcasts, just like Brad Holmes is we're tasked with asking Brad Holmes for more defensive end help. We're tasked with more content, more articles, more opinions, more thoughts about the Detroit Lions. Why? Because you guys support it. So thank you for helping us get to our first 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. It's great to engage, comments, like, hate. If you like it or you don't, we're here. We don't apologize. We're not backing down. We stand by our opinions. And the blessing of this is that we're in control. We fire it up when we want. We write what we want. And we hope that you can have civil debate. But if you can't, no problem either. We can stand our toes, stand our ground regarding what we say. And that's why we're credentialed media. And that's why we're producing great content on a daily basis for the last 7 years. Thanks, everybody. I can't wait. Maybe Friday, maybe Saturday, maybe Monday. We'll come back again later on to bring you more coverage of the Detroit Lions, which is maybe going to be on the side of, well, they took these guys. What about the other guys? And I like that aspect as we continue to dive into this draft. Please continue to make us a small part of the sports community. And I can't wait to fire it up next time on the next episode of the Detroit Lions Lone Wolves podcast.